Welcome to TechPort, where we will be discussing the connection between language, brain, and culture.
Language is a principal method of human communication that includes speech, gestures, and writing. This system of spoken or written symbols is how human beings, as members of a social group and participants in its culture, express themselves. An example of language is spoken communication. Hand gestures and facial expressions are also used as a form of communication, as seen in sign languages and when you are trying to get someone's attention. Culture is the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of racial, religious, or social group. For example, customs, laws, architectural style, social standards, religious beliefs, and traditions. However, culture should not be confused with heritage. Heritage is what is inherited, whereas culture is what's created. Culture is the attitudes, traditions, and norms of society, which is greatly influenced by language. These communications help to build strong relations, and as people with different cultures connect, one of the hardest barriers they face is language.
Hegemony is the ruling power that controls all influences. For instance, America influences westernization in other countries because they believe it's the only way a country can function properly. For instance, westernization from the British in India has left a negative impact on their country and cultural and religious beliefs. Before westernization in India, they wore cultural attires such as a kurta. But now jeans and t-shirts are the attires that are forced to wear. This causes worries on elders who want to regain their culture back. Others may discuss that westernization is a good thing for countries because it may allow them to become successful as the U.S. I believe it has the opposite effect. When westernization is forced upon foreign countries, it tends to lead them to lose their cultural values. Culture is something important in society since it ties bonds between people and many types of art forms such as art, music, theater, literature, and etc. It could help represent that culture as well. Westernization should be something that shouldn't be forced upon.
To add on, a hegemon greatly influences the other cultures it surrounds through the process of globalization, which has become more prevalent after the turn of the 20th century. This expansion shows itself in American society, at least, through the expansion of American companies into varying different demographics around the world. Some of these companies include tech companies and fast food restaurants, but there's still an overarching theme of American influence in these areas. For example, there's over 120 countries globally with a McDonald's inside, and about 145 countries with a KFC. So both of these companies are extremely successful American ventures, and they decided to expand globally. Now, although this wasn't controlled by the U.S. government, this is still sort of imploring onto the people of the native area that they're setting up their stores in, that the American Western way is the best way to do things. There's also the massive influence of the American tech company, such as Uber, Lyft, Microsoft, and Facebook is another one where these companies have major influences on how the other countries around the world to build upon their infrastructure, like using Microsoft, for example. Many international companies use Microsoft as their system to build what they're going to work on. And this sort of allows the American influence to seep its way into varying fields of study, into varying fields of culture. And it's overarching theme among various places around the world.
Values shape the society that often categorize how people should or should not behave, which helps set a certain standard to become an ideal culture. An ideal culture is surrounded by ideal value systems that control perfect behavior, whereas real culture has an adaptable value system followed by preferred guidelines. This helps narrow down the gaps between ideal and actual culture. Additionally, human value systems intertwine with the teaching and experience of their culture, which explains if someone were to be exposed to new culture, it may take all that person's knowledge and alter what is good and bad, unjust, just, etc. This showcases the significance that culture has on value.
Culture impacts knowledge because if you speak multiple languages, your brain power increases. Those who can speak more than one language are proven to have a better memory, problem solving, and critical thinking skills. They also had enhanced concentration, the ability to multitask, and better listening skills. Chinese children learn to count faster than English-speaking children, since Chinese numbers are more repetitive and straightforward than English numbers. In Chinese, 11 is 10-1. Similarly, people who speak certain Australian languages are better at orientating themselves in space than people who speak English, since they can always tell north from south, even in the dark.
Culture can also shape logic within many countries. For instance, Western culture values are liberty and formal logic, which leads them to think more analytically and focus on the topics and objects. To add on, Westerns think more scientifically than religiously.
Technological development as well is also greatly dependent on the culture that is present in the region where the technology is being used. In Africa, for example, Kenya has become one of the leading countries in mobile payments globally. This is due in part to the prevailing culture of a lack of access to debit cards and sometimes even bank accounts for some people. To compensate for this lack of debit cards and bank accounts and other uses, many people resorted to paying on the phone using SMS for invoices and also transactions between private individuals as well. In Nigeria, something similar also happened where a large influx of mobile payments has become the norm almost. Ontology is the branch of metaphysics essentially concerned with the nature and how things are related to each other in the terms of their being, is the best way to put it. Newtology, on the other hand, is related to ontology. However, it derives from the African conceptual theory that all things and concepts are united under the two. The two is a human being, and it basically emphasizes the idea that there is a spirit of oneness among people and nature, and it strives to have harmony between the two of these different sectors, almost. Cosmology, on the other hand, is the general study of the science of the origin and the development of the universe. So this could go back to the Big Bang Theory or the creation of the galaxies or any other sort of astronomical body. This is basically what cosmology is. And modern astronomy is dominated by the Big Bang Theory, which is basically the observational astronomy and the particle physics, which bring together the whole field. This relates to culture as it gives people the ability to perceive themselves and how they exist within a universe. This idea has formulated many of the early theories of cosmology and religion that is known today.
Some examples of Eastern-speaking languages are Arabic, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Turkish. Focusing on Arabic, which is the fourth spoken language in the world, brings advantages and disadvantages. One advantage of Eastern language is grasping the richness and diversity of Arab culture through literature, film, etc. This displays that speaking an Eastern language may help interact with society while developing an objective understanding. Another advantage of Eastern language is that it challenges the brain. Based on studies conducted in Israel at the University of Haifa, reading Arabic is so very complicated for the right side of the brain and therefore leaves all the job to the left side. Western languages focus on the cause of certain group rather than the moral and beliefs of the language. As languages advance, there are different dialects, meaning they become difficult to understand and learn. With that being said, mastering the Eastern language is commonly found difficult.
On the other hand, those who speak Western European languages have the benefit to keep their brain working at an optimum capacity. When learning a new language, it helps thickens the part of the brain that is responsible for the function of learning, consciousness, and memory. To further discuss another advantages is speaking romantic languages. Those consist of Spanish, Italian, French, and etc. Although speaking these languages have their advantages, there is also disadvantages. One of those disadvantages include the oppression of other countries' values. For example, during the Spain colonization of Latin America, countries have suppressed the original native language that these countries are trying to salvage back. To add on, another disadvantage are the cultural belief of those who speak Western European languages. In history, those who spoke the language suppressed other countries' religious beliefs. For instance, in France, they are planning to create a ban on hijabs, which is important in Islam.
Language can reshape culture due to the social influences in which that language is used. Cultural and or social realities are highly impacted by spoken language and can help norms and rules be internalized so that people function in their own culture. However, this may be mistaken when used in a cultural context, since people adapt to situations by changing the way they communicate. For example, in America, immigrant societies are accustomed to a certain language, so they will continue to use it to keep it alive. This creates different cultures and societies in order to preserve their language.
Ultimately, these examples and information help outline the connection between language, culture, and brain structure. By doing so, it helps understand how it negatively and positively impacts towards each other.
Stay tuned for the next episode where we go more in depth with real-world examples of how language affects your brain and culture.
And please be sure to follow our other social media sites, such as TechPort on YouTube, capital T, lowercase e, CH, capital P, lowercase ORT, and our Tumblr page, all lowercase and TECHPORT, TechPort, along with our Podbean, which is the same as our YouTube.